Welcome to this week's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Murray Derraugh, VP of Risk at Sonoma Capital. Thanks for joining me, Murray.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
No, it's great to have you on here. And kind of what I was mentioning before I hit record. I've seen you on LinkedIn, so I feel like I communicate with you on that platform, but I don't think we've actually seen each other probably maybe CFLA 2019.
Probably the last time, yes.
It's been a minute, and unfortunately, I won't be able to get up there again this year because it overlaps with one of the charity events that I have in Chicago. So, to make sure I get with Mike to make sure they don't overlap next year.
Yeah, exactly.
But Murray, for the people that haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself and your career to date in equipment finance?
Sure. My name's Murray Derraugh. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Home of the Jets, just in case anybody needs a plug there. So I started in the equipment finance business in the mid-90s after a little over a decade in the paint and industrial coatings manufacturing business. And I spent my first 8 years at National Leasing, did a variety of roles. At that point, started as National Credit Manager, had a stint of a few years running Western Canada sales, and then started a subprime division for National Leasing. And so that we were able to provide solutions for a broader range of credit profiles. And then I finished my last few years as Director of Credit, still overseeing the subprime group as well. And then I went into the credit card business for a few years, worked for a MasterCard affiliate. So that's my time that I actually left the finance industry, but was still in financial services. And then I joined my old colleague from National Leasing, Hugh Swandell, and we were consulting. My first gig actually was starting we took the CLFP program from the States and we Canadianized it. And so I was editor-in-chief of that program. It's now called CLEO, and it's now being phased out to the CFLA. But so for a number of years, I had a variety of projects that I did for small and large equipment finance companies, majority of them in Canada, but some in the US as well. And then in 2014, had the opportunity to rejoin the industry and went back to National Leasing, which was then taken over by Canadian Western Bank, and is now known today as CWB National Leasing. And ran that for just about another 8 years. And then in January of 22, I had the opportunity to join another industry colleague that I've known for many years, Randy Smith, who is starting up a new, primarily a small ticket equipment finance company in Canada, an independent, non-bank, non-public operation called Sonoma Capital, and proudly was employee number one of that group. And so now we're about 18 months into that venture, and that's what brings me here today.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you for that. And shame on me, I did not know Randy, because who was he with before?
Randy originally had started Mercado Capital many years ago, sold it, and then came back after a non-compete period and started Rundle Capital.
Okay, and, that was the name that was on my mind.
And then Stride Capital, which was just recently divested. It's a credit union has just recently purchased that in June. So, and Sonoma is another one of the platforms that he's a majority shareholder in.
That's great. So, so you went from an equipment finance organization to being a consultant, and then back to an equipment finance organization. I guess pros and cons of potentially doing that, because I've been a service provider forever, and then now I'm on my own. So I'm always kind of just wondering. And by the way, Hugh Swandell was the first Canadian that I've ever had on one of these, like a
Oh,
couple of years ago.
there you go.
So
Yeah. Yeah, Hugh and I we actually go back, way back to university days when we used to paint houses together. So that's how far Hugh and I go
okay.
back. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so the interesting part, I would say, of the consulting world, as you probably know and experience, is you have the opportunity to pick your clients, which is cool. You don't get caught up in the politics of an organization. You don't have water cooler chats that drain your day, and endless meetings. So there's all those positive things. On the downside, you're constantly marketing to get your next gig, and as it just ends up happening, you get a number of competing deadlines with projects, and so there's a time when you want to clone yourself, and then there's other times when you really don't have enough to do. And then
Sure.
the big thing was you just never really have a sense of belonging anywhere. You go into organizations and you're having a birthday party or something, and you're just the guy over in the side there doing whatever project, and you just never really feel like you're part of something bigger. But that has its pros and cons as well. And then going back into the equipment finance, the big benefit was that you bring this incredible depth of knowledge from having participated at high levels with the C-suite of a number of your colleagues in the industry, and understanding what they do and how they do it. And you just bring this just a deeper knowledge and experience base, I would say. And then when you see some people that spend the majority of their career in one company, and I would say, unless you really are dedicated to spending time going to the various industry conferences like the ELFA, NEFA, and CFLA in Canada, and really participate and network and want to learn and not just go there for the party, you just don't have as broad an overview or perspective. Sure. So that's the big thing that I found. And quite honestly, I've never once, in any of the times since leaving consulting, said to myself or my colleagues, hey, you know what company X did? We should try to replicate that. It's a weird blending of all Sure. this experience. And you tend to start reacting more based on the glut of experience you have, as opposed to trying to draw upon how to replicate something. And so I'd say is the really cool thing about coming back into the industry. And it's a great industry.
No, I mean, I can definitely, you said something that's kind of like hit home a little bit, where it's that sense of belonging, where you're not really a part of a team. I mean, you are your own person, which is great because you can't pick and choose. I mean, if you go back to those days, I'm sure you had some opportunities that came across and you're just like, it's going to be a problem. You're not going to listen. Like, what am I here for? So exactly. You just kind of be like politely, no, thank you. This isn't going to be a good fit, or you just throw out some astronomical number. And the problem is always when they actually take it, you're just like, oh, come on. Like, no, like, it's going to work. But yeah, I mean, it's that sense of camaraderie. It's one of the reasons I love this industry so much, is even different teams, like you said, different conferences, you get to see how they work and everything else, the inside out. So definitely understand kind of where you're at. And I don't think I've ever worked this many hours in my, going on 19 years now and doing this, which good and bad, I guess there. So if you don't mind, Murray, do you mind? Oh, real quick. You mentioned the CLFP and you guys Canadianized it, if I said that correctly.
Yes.
Pardon my ignorance. Like, besides like some of the tax stuff and everything else, what else? What else did that entail?
Yeah. So what's interesting is the program was CLP back then. The program was delivered in person only, and so which works well in the U.S. because of your heavy concentrations of population.
Sure.
Geographically challenged Canada, it is a little more difficult. And we're at that point where webinars were more the way to deliver certain data. So what we ended up doing is we had live instructors, but we broke it down into the modules, which CLP was in modules, but we broke it down so that you could take a module at a time and sort of on a Ferris wheel, like you jump on, jump off whenever you want. So you didn't have to go in order necessarily. So we had to do a lot. There's different engagement tools you use. So you do surveys and like the question and answer polls, that type of thing. And I don't know if you remember the old CLP, but it was like the PowerPoints were like they're Ukrainian colors. They're the blue and the bright yellow, which was cool, but it doesn't really work that well on when you're doing it on over the web. So there was that part. The CFLA also includes the vehicle lessors and the fleet lessors in Canada, again, because we don't have the same population base in the US. So it was tax issues that we would Canadianize, the UCC filings or PPSA filings in Canada. ACH is PAD in Canada. So there's some terminology. But it really came down to, it was more the legal and the accounting that needed the heaviest tweaks. And then embedding some of the references to fleet and auto. So.
Got it. And you said that's being sunsetted. I think the CLFP is now completely online. I think that they're starting a new online program.
Yeah, so actually, it's just the version that I originally did is probably being sunsetted, but they are committed to. So we didn't have the exam in Canada; they didn't have the actual certification, but that is now being planned to bring into Canada. So it'll follow more the CFLP program that you would know in the States.
Perfect. Well, and you mentioned you're from Winnipeg. So is that where Sonoma's headquarters is?
So Sonoma's head office is Calgary, and we've got our accounting finance staff that are there. Our main center where we have the bulk of our staff, so credit and executive, majority of the executive, et cetera, are in Winnipeg. And then we have a sales office in New Brunswick, and we have an office in Montreal as well. So, and then in today's modern hybrid world, we have a lot of staff that do work primarily from home. And in Winnipeg, we've got about half of the staff in Winnipeg work full-time from the office, and the others, we just have hoteling stations, and it works really well, and they come in for their connection points, and the rest of the time they're able to work from home. And then across Canada, it's sort of the same. And we've got, people literally from BC to New Brunswick and all points in between.
So is that kind of been the back to work type philosophy, where you're getting about 50% of the people that want to come back and actually be in the office?
Yeah, I would say it's just a little less than that. But, pre-COVID, I had a much bigger department, my last employer, and we had about a third of the department that was working remotely. A lot of them, it was, they were just that much further out from the main office, or in Quebec, they were just further out from. And rather than having them spend an hour and a half in traffic every day each way, it just made, and they worked really, really well. And so it was a fairly easy transition when COVID hit. And then on the other side of it, well, we had proven it out that it wasn't a flash in the pan thing. And then today's modern workforce, I mean, if you want to attract the best people and retain them, you need to give them that flexibility. And I think it's a bit of a myth that you need to be in the office in order to create the right vibe. I think there's other ways to do it, and we've been quite successful to date, I would say, accommodating it. So,
well, that's a testament to your organization, because I know some people are still struggling with trying to engage, especially the younger workforce, where it's like it's an attractive quality where it's like, oh, I don't have to commute. but there's some of that, like you mentioned earlier, that water cooler conversation that can be dragging, but it also can be beneficial from a career perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's hard to balance that every now and
Yeah,
then.
yeah, it is. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you have some fun events when they do, and for example, our credit risk team, they tend to come in on Tuesdays. The majority of them are in Winnipeg. So that's our day. We meet in the conference room. We have some laughs. Sometimes we go over to lunch, and then a group of them would probably come on the Fridays, and sometimes late on the Friday afternoon there might be some libations that are passed around, and but it's just and at the end of the day, what I've found is the most attracting feature is we treat people like adults, and we just say to them, like, you're a professional. We're going to treat you like an adult, and we're going to trust you that you're going to do a good day's work, and we don't have to check up on you. And then if you've got good systems, basically what they're doing anyway in terms of volume. And but yeah, you keep them happy that way, and you give them that flexibility. That's, to me, that's one of the keys to helping retain your talent.
No, spot on. Like you mentioned, people just want to be treated like adults. It's like, here's my expectations of you. Obviously, I would like you to exceed my expectations of you, but don't go down here, okay?
Yeah.
And I apologize for getting a little out of order here. You mentioned like Sonoma Capital's offices, and you guys are spread pretty much throughout Canada. Do you mind just kind of introducing that organization, like your ticket size? I believe you mentioned how long you've been in business, but just a general overview.
Sure.
You don't mind, Murray?
Yeah, officially the company started in October 21, but I came on in February 22, as I said, as employee number one, and that's where we really started to build out the company, the credit policies, the credit box, and aligning the securitization partners and all of those things. So a lot of heavy lifting in the first 6 months, and then started funding in the spring of 22. So we're just past really the first full year of full funding. And so we're, if we include the executive that are not 100% dedicated to Sonoma, there's 36 of us, so quite good growth in a year. We literally are in every province. I currently have one of my senior credit analysts who spends half her time up in Whitehorse, so we're actually even in the territories. And so our average ticket size, we're around the 100K mark, and we'll do exposures up to $500,000. But of course, when you're starting a portfolio, you have to be a lot more careful because you just don't have the girth of the portfolio to absorb any problems. So we've been certainly more cautious and conservative at the beginning, and we're starting to increase our exposure levels, and we'll go beyond that as the portfolio matures. And in terms of the type of business, I would say we're a generalist type business. We're sourcing business primarily through our direct sales force that are either direct to end user or through vendor channel. And we also have a nice complement of some key lease brokers. And our portfolio mix would be transportation and construction would be the heavier components, but what I've certainly learned over my decades in this business is a well-diversified portfolio by geography, industry, asset, deal size is really what helps you through the ups and downs.
Absolutely,
And so we're very, very focused on that. Some might say I've micromanaged that in the first year, but I think that's prudent to make sure that we're really on the right track. And we've got a very experienced workforce that both in terms of origination, credit funding, finance. So it's it's an incredible moment, especially at this point in my career, where and I'm sure you've been through these, Jesse, where you bring a facilitator in or a consultant in, and they say, okay, let's do a blue sky session, and they have a big whiteboard, and then they say, so what would you do differently if you could start over? And so then people come up with great ideas, and then you start throwing darts at them, saying, well, we can't really do that because of this legacy issue,
Sure.
or an innovation engineering, which we used to use, they'd be called death threats, like that's not going to work. So then you have all these impediments that to be able to do what you really want to do. Well, to actually have the years of experience, the team, and to be able to say, yeah, we literally are starting with zero contracts, and how do we want our contracts to look? How do we want to approach the market? It is really a pinch me moment where you're able to do that. And I mean, there's rules and regulations you have to follow, but your go-to market and not having those legacy issues, it's just it's
I mean, you had the legacy issues, you had the red tape of a bank, right? I mean, I think of your previous organization, how many contracts they had, the systems that they were on, where it's like, yeah, that'd be great, but how's that going to get done?
Yeah, exactly. So it's nice to have that freedom once again of making decisions. I've never been afraid to make decisions. But when you are in a bigger organization and things have to go through layers, and you understand why, to a degree, why layers are necessary. But when you have more of that entrepreneurial spirit, this type of setup certainly suits me. I would say better. So,
yeah, I think the only challenge I would have, or that maybe you run into, where it's like, yeah, it's a great idea, right? Now go execute it, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. Oh, I've made collection calls. I've done everything. Our team, I mean, we've been in the weeds. We're now at the point where we're able to work a little less in the business and more on the business in terms of more strategy, but it's also, when you're in the weeds, you really learn the business, and then it really helps you hand off to the next group. And so yeah, it's not for the faint of heart starting a new enterprise, for sure, but it is hugely rewarding.
Well, and that's one of the things that I'm learning as working for, OSG before, which was, a decent sized organization, and then going to Lease Team or LTI, which was 100 employees. And then you go to a smaller company and it's like, okay, well, this is great, Jesse. Here, go do that. Go write that policy. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? But it allows you just to learn that much more about the process and appreciate it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's thank you for that little background there on Sonoma. So like Winnipeg, I've never been. Kim Jones kept trying to get me to go up there for like a Jets Rangers game. So I still need to do that. However, selfishly, hopefully that happens, I don't know, March. I think Hugh had that benefit concert in February, and he's like, hey, and I'm like, we'll sponsor, but I don't know if I'm going to come in February.
Well, I'll say this in defense of Winnipeg and our cold winters at times, is it's a dry cold. And my colleagues from Toronto always laugh when say, oh yeah, you guys always say that. But it is, so when it does get cold, you can generally weather it.
Okay. Well, I live in Arizona. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah. So
it's a dry heat. I'm like, it's 120. Okay. You walk outside and you move too fast and you get burned. It feels like you're in an oven.
Fair enough.
So you guys basically grew this. So Randy comes to you and says, hey, I want you to be employee number 1 in October of 21, which I'm sure the majority of Canada was still pretty much in lockdown. Well, that's when it happened. I'm sure this happened a little bit before, but so you were coming out of COVID, right? Or it's relatively still locked down.
Yeah, I think actually, to give you a little bit better idea, I mean, I wasn't in at the beginning the concept was, according to Randy, and Randy does have in his office, literally has a wall that is a whiteboard, and on it was independent prime small ticket leasing company was part of his platform, because his other platforms, as you know, were more the mid tickets and one of them more in the near prime. But he knew that he needed the right team. And then there's been some changes in the Canadian market, and there were some opportunities, and I would say, I mean, and I've certainly seen it over time in the U.S. where the banks own leasing companies and then they divest, and then an event happens like the credit crisis, and then they gather them up again, and then something will happen, and I think we're at the point of heavy regulation again that is making it harder and harder to operate an equipment finance company that tends to be more nimble and doesn't fit in that commercial banking. So Randy, who's a serial entrepreneur, saw the opportunity and saw the shift in the marketplace and thought this is the time to do it. So he was quietly building, putting the name in place and registrations, et cetera, and then started to advertise for roles. And so it would have been late in 21 when I got involved with him. But he was definitely having conversations with a variety of people, because he just sensed that the timing was right. But Randy's the type of guy that you'd love having a conversation with him at a CFLA conference, because he's a very social, affable person. And so those relationships, they, again, spending time at the CFLA or ELFA or NEFA or whichever events, you can't stress those enough, that you never know when it's going to come back and help you in your career. And I would say that's one of those moments.
Yeah, it was going to be my next topic of conversation, Murray, was like kind of like, what is the CFLA and ELFA and NEFA, like what do those trade associations kind of mean to you, and then growing a relatively newer business, and just overall kind of industry relationships and what they have meant to your career.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly been involved in all three of those associations over the years. More recently, because we're building in Canada, the CFLA. But those, as I said at the beginning, if you haven't had the opportunity to work for other leasing companies, or certainly in a consulting role where you get to work with them, a lot over an intense period of time, going to those associations that are representing the members for regulatory issues that really need to be reviewed and thought out differently, just to keep up on accounting changes, that type of thing, legal changes. The association is just so important for that, providing a voice, whether it's at Capitol Hill or in our parliament in Canada, hugely important. The networking, and just learning best practices. So I participated for a number of years. And then the other thing is, I would say that at some point in your career, you want to be able to give back. And so I've been on the education and programming committee for several years for CFLA, and amongst other things, including the education components like the CLEO program and some of the other. We also put on the conferences and the golf tournament, etc. So, but you meet great people, you make more connections, and it's just, it's really cool. And then Hugh and I are on the research committee, and so that's similar to the ELFA Foundation, where they're deciding on which research projects to invest in. So we do that as well, and so it's a great thing to participate in, and it does help you, because when you're a smaller company and you're thinking, I'm running up to an issue of X, and then you just go back through your Rolodex of contacts, and people take your calls because they know who you are and you've built credibility over time. And so it's and if I go back to the painting industry many years ago, they had great associations as well. I mean, that's just, and so what that industry association did for that industry is very similar to what our industry does for our people. And hey, if you can get together with people that you work with and compete against and have a couple of drinks and some good laughs a couple times a year, I mean, I think it's worth it too.
No, I agree 100%. And it's like you see that sense of almost family when you're at any of these events. I guess my only thing with the CFLA is they have the golf outing, right? And then they have like the annual. Has there ever been like a talk of maybe having something else throughout those years, or is it more web-based?
Yeah, we've tried a number of different things. I mean, we all tried the virtual conference during COVID, which were, the technology wasn't quite there. And at the end of the day, it just doesn't quite work.
No.
But what we did learn is that some of these interim webinars that are very specific to, say, a new legal issue or a change in the accounting, that they work really, really well for that. Or say Equifax or TransUnion might put on a webinar that's sponsored, or you bring the economist in for an update. I think those work really well. We just have a hard time getting enough people to come to. We don't have a problem with the annual convention, and the golf, as you know, has sort of ebbed and flowed over the years. And quite frankly, COVID has been the best thing that ever happened to the golf industry. It's really lit a fire under it. So there's definitely more interest in it, but we've toyed about doing that. And I know NEFA has a lot of the regional events. We've tried some of those. The Women in Equipment Finance and part of CFLA have done some of those events. And we also have a Future Leaders Conference.
Okay.
Our committee that, and they do some of those regional events as well. But on the grander scale, it's a bit of a challenge, I would say.
Well, I mean, I guess it's similar here. I mean, you have a lot of California events, and then you have like the New York events, but it's Chicago, so it doesn't seem like it's that. I guess the geographic issues or limitations aren't as cumbersome as what you have up there to deal with. I know that from a EF Cares charity perspective, we're looking to have a program up there sometime over the next couple of years. I'd like to get one up there next year. But it would probably be around the GTA area, just because there's so many. It's the easiest.
Easiest to get
location.
to, from anywhere, and that is that's the densest concentration of equipment finance in Canada for sure.
Well, that's awesome. So, Murray, I ask everyone on here to give me a fun fact about themselves. So, something that makes you tick outside of equipment finance.
Yeah. Well, So usually when people ask me this question or similar, sort of have two actually, but they're kind of related. So, my wife and I have two whippets that are like small greyhounds, ultra fast. Really cool dogs. And the tie-in is I'm a huge F1 fan, Formula One fan. And so again, I guess speed is sort of at the crux of me. And I also will say that I was an F1 fan prior to Netflix Drive to Survive. So I'm not one that just jumped on the bandwagon, although that is a really cool show and really enjoy it.
I guess I'll have to write that one down. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I've even got a Ferrari F1 car model on my desk, so it's I'm a bit of a F1 freak.
That's awesome. And so it's like, was it the show? Was it Yellowstone? So it's like people watch that and they want to go be a cowboy. It's like, come on, man! I had this before the show came out.
Yeah.
And I guess just kind of in closing, why should an end customer or a broker want to do business with Sonoma Capital?
Yeah, that's always a tough question. I think we take a different approach, a very humanistic approach, right from the credit sales phase through to helping people through their issues if they run into some payment issues. It's just a more forward-thinking approach, and we're fair, we're experienced, and we try to treat customers fairly and treat them. And I know it sounds cliche, but we do literally try to treat them like we want to be treated. And it's not just all a profit center. It's yeah. So I would say that's sort of the main focus.
Well, perfect, Murray. Well, I appreciate your time today, sir. Sorry I won't be seeing you, in a few weeks at the CFLA. I'm sure we'll try to figure something out. Oh, the one other question I forgot to ask is, is it just strictly Canada? Do you do any U.S. business whatsoever?
Yeah, we're Canadian business. So the assets have to be in Canada, but we do deal with some U.S. vendors that have customers in Canada, but we're on the side of the border at this moment.
Gotcha. Well, I guess I'll have to probe Randy and see if I can get you guys to come down here so I can selfishly see you.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate your time, Murray. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse.